my wife and myself, that's Patsy and myself, we have led the charge in this ministry around the world. And every time I go to speak, even today, she says to me every time, all of him, none of you, right? Because you are answering a call, Niels, you are answering a call. And wherever the call come right now, we have the government of Grenada who is asking me for a meeting on Tuesday coming because they saw what happens in Lucia and they want to engage it here. But we are saying, Lord, you called us, and we live by the eighth rule of the Pathfinder law, because we are Pathfinders, go on God's errands, and anywhere he calls us, Lord, we'll go. And of course, we'll talk about the ramifications of that, especially when it comes to husband and wife, a little later in the conversation.
Yeah, well, you mentioned something there that I just want to follow up on a little quick, just for a little while. This human, I mean, we are ministers of God, undoubtedly, but we are human beings. Yeah. And so there is that struggle. You may say the Apostle Paul says that, which I would not, that I find myself doing. The carnal nature every now and then seeps in. And there is this concept of, I'm a human being, I have worked really, really hard. I've done this, I've done that. And look, at the end of the day, I'm not returned to office and I feel bad. How do you address an issue for somebody who may be, let's say, there ought not to be any sense of entitlement. I like to say that nobody's entitled to anything in God's church. Right. But from the human perspective, there is always that tendency. So how do you address that?
And from the human perspective, and you've said it right, because no matter how humble we try to project ourselves, there is something in the human being that seems to always want to rise. Thank God for that, by the way. Thank God for that. Because sometimes when we are knocked down really hard, we need to rise. So it's an element, but it's an element we got to be careful with, very careful with. Because sometimes when we get into positions, we cannot justify or, the feeling with the position. And sometimes it gets to our head. I mean, I've seen. I think I've traveled the world enough to see pastors of big churches, city churches. And later on, they transfer to a smaller church. And it affects them. It affects them badly. I remember in the case of Carrico, Grenada has Grenada and Carrico, which is the sister island. And Carrico felt that way. They felt, well, when you send us, all the pastors are ready to retire. That's the way they felt from the congregation. However, it also affected the psyche of the pastors, because once they were going to Carrico, they felt like they were Paul on the Isle of Patmos, being abandoned, right? So in all of us, Pastor, the truth about it, the human nature is that we want the best. We want the best situation to operate, especially when we are trained. When we are trained, we want the most ideal and most pleasant environment which we could thrive under and show what we can do. But I'm also saying that when we are trained and we are consecrated, even if we are told to serve in an area that is really challenging, that's where our congregation, that's where our conference, that's where our district could see that God is really leading. And I tell you that just come from St. Lucia, and one of the places that we had to work, Pastor, the commissioner of police told me straight up. She said, Dr. Chaitan, when you went to work on the street corner in a ghetto area, the devil is scared to go there. That was my exact words to me. The devil is scared to go there. But when I went there, what did the people say? We don't see people coming and talk to us like that, right? But what did I do? I could feel demeaned about it. And I feel this is letting know my professionalism. Or I could say, you know what, man? There is a calling. There are people who need to hear me. And so it shows you up. And so it shows you up even in a better light, that by you accepting this challenge and you are able to excel with God on your side, it speaks volumes.
So what I hear you saying, therefore, is that you sense a need to minister to people in that environment. And that became a motivating force that wanted you to go there, which is very different to an individual saying, that is a bad area. I don't want to go there because it's not safe. So the sense of need, the commitment to change, to make a difference, to be used by God can be a significant factor in terms of what attitude do I approach this assignment with. And I think that that is an important factor. You mentioned that there are, in our territory, we do have 5 islands, some large, some small. And so there is this, again, human perspective. I have served my time. I'm a senior pastor. They can't send me to this particular territory or this particular church.
Right.
But in the Seventh Adventist system, we like to say that every congregation, large or small, deserves to have a good pastor. And we should, I did hear a story some time ago about a shoe salesman being sent to a place where nobody wore shoes. He radioed and said, please bring me home. Nobody here wears shoes. And they took him home and sent somebody else. And the guy sent another message, please send more shoes. Nobody here has any. So perspective can make a big difference, and I think that's a good approach. Yes.
Yeah. But, I'll just comment. And I know we're talking about the call of God on a minister's life or on a worker's life. But you brought up an aspect or an element there, and that's we're talking about seniority, right? Because seniority usually gives you this entitlement, this entitled feeling, right? That I'm now a senior pastor, and so I don't deserve to go there, or I deserve this church, or I deserve this district. If we are looking from a business model, Pastor, that is correct. If we're looking from a business model, because in a business model, you perform and you are rewarded or awarded, right? They have all trips for you. They have all kind of certificates and great things for you because it's based on performance. That's a business model. But when we come to the ministry model, it is a call you get. And whether I've been in the ministry for 20 years or not, if a call comes, no, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. And I pray that we see less of that in our church. But if it's a case where you think that you have been, it's punitive, right? You are being sent to a place because it's a punitive move on behalf of administration. That's a different thing. Then in this case, justice take, Micah 6:8, justice, do justly, that take precedence. However, if it's a genuine call where who knows, Pastor? I may be performing so eloquently and so great in the perfect situation, or what I deem as the perfect situation for my intentions, my objectives, or my ambitions. But you may be seen as possessing a certain skill that nobody has. And by the way, I'm not a minister of the gospel. I'm an ordained minister of the gospel. But I remember when I was in Toronto West Church, which is the big church. Pastor, that's the mother church in Toronto, the mother Caribbean church. And I was a young elder. I was a young hotshot elder. I mean, in those days, Pastor, the media would come in and shoot our complete service and broadcast across the nation. That was the power of the church. And I used to be on that team. And they called me. And the pastor said to me, because I play the piano, we are starting a little brand Sabbath school. Pastor, insignificant place. And listen to what it's called, the jungle. So it tells a little about the socio-economic and cultural. And they said to me, you know what? Can you just come play the piano for us? And then you could go back because you got to be on TV. And Pastor, I was in my black suit and my red tie, ready for shooting the TV. The pastor was in his too. But when we got into that thing, I saw the dire need for leadership. And I decided, my wife and myself, she just had a young baby, our first son. I was still in university, but the call came to us. And we said, you know what, man, this place needs us. It's not the bright lights. It's not where we have the production. It's not where we have the big band. And I'm a trumpet player in the band, by the way. So it took a lot of sacrifice. But we realized that this was a call from God. And Niels, you and Patsy, you have the expertise, or you have the gifts and talents that needed here. So we had to now resign the big church and go to a little place with 25 people. Hey, I got good news. Today it is a Toronto Central Church with over 800 members.
Amen. Amen. You know, that is a sense of a call, you know, when you are in it for God and not for self. And I think that really does make the difference. That shares perspective. And so that in some way answers the question, the next question I'm going to ask, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway, because there may be another dimension to it. So you mentioned earlier, of course, you mentioned the business model, and you mentioned the call model, but we are also talking from the human perspective. Some persons may have what we call ambition. You know, they desire what some call upward mobility. Now, how upward mobility looks in ministry may be a totally different thing altogether, but they desire upward mobility. And some people say, well, you know, listen, I am on the field for 25 years, for 35 years. You know, I have experience in this, I have experience in that. And so I want to go back to this session thing. We are appointing leaders and directors and that kind of thing. So somebody may say, I think I'm entitled. It's time enough that I get this particular position. And this is not a strange thing. We hear this from time to time. It's time enough I get a particular position. And the session comes and goes, and they don't get that particular position. And they become discouraged. They think that, you know, something went wrong. They're robbed. Maybe the people on the nominating committee were not depending on the Holy Spirit. And people come to all kinds of conclusions. Bottom line is, an individual like this may become not just disappointed, but discouraged. How would you counsel somebody in a situation like that? Okay.
Again, Pastor, and that is why I rolled out, and I hear you very clearly. And the reason why I'm so adamant about this, because I'm seeing it a lot. And you see, Pastor, even with our work within the social realm, we tend to use it sometimes to kind of you know, pacify situations and say, well, you know what, let's look at this angle. I understand that pastors are human beings. I understand that they go through serious training, which qualifies them to lead. I understand also from the human perspective, we want upward mobility. It's all in all of us to want upward mobility. But the thing about it is that we have two choices. We really do have two choices. When it comes to upward mobility and being chosen for a particular role in the conference or in whatever field, there are only two choices. And I'm sorry, I have to now mix two of the models that I gave you, right? One of them is campaigning, or two, pray. So we either rely fully on prayer and say, Lord, if I didn't get it, that meant it wasn't for me. Or do I campaign? And why would I campaign? Because I know there are people at the top, or people who could make it happen for me, that may not want me to be there. And so what people do in those cases, they get in a campaigning mode. And by the way, I actually saw it. I literally saw it in the Ontario Conference, which is my home conference, right? With one blow, swing of the arm, nominating committee was sent back, and in a couple of minutes time came with a brand new president. He was campaigned, it was fixed really. So the question is, why do we pray? Why do we pray if we are coming with our own agenda? My friends, I tell you what, the good news about this, the three models that I gave, Pastor, the political, the business, and the ministry, that they are all judged by one word, or probably two words, mean the same thing: impact, or well, let's say impact. That word just slipped me. That other P word just slipped me there. Or performance. Impact or performance, right? If you are performing well and you are performing within your gift, right? And you're doing it of the Lord, and you're doing it because you're called, and you're doing it to your best of your ability. Let me tell you something. It will be noticed. It will be looked upon as an asset to the administration. That's why I don't go around, Pastor, saying, hey, I'm the best thing in the social realm. I don't do that. I said, this is what I've done. Check it out. And if you think it's something that is worthy, then you make your pick. You decide or not. So for those that, again, upward movement in people, it's a natural human thing. But when it happens that when you are in the ministry model, despite how much you are ambitious, and by the way, you probably undertook your training and your education to match your ambition, right? To match your ambition, because you have a place where you want to end up. At the end of the day, in ministry, that would work well in business. That would work well in politics. But in ministry, it is still spirit-led. And so at that point in time, there has to be a level of acceptance, you know? And you know, I say in my book, Pulling the Plug, because for some people, that's loss. That's loss. I lost that position. I was there for 10 years, or I was there for 8 years, and I think I performed well, and then they voted me out. Really and truly, that's a loss. And the natural answer to loss is grief. No, we may not be like a death in the family, but there is this kind of a where like they pour a bucket of cold water in you, and you can't get up, and you wonder, am I still interested, Lord? Am I still called, Lord? You know what? I didn't expect. But again, Pastor, what causes anxiety? What causes stress? What causes, you know, these are all caused because of expectations. Unmet expectations. You want to go to ambitions, great. But I had that expectation to go there. I was doing everything I can to go there because I think I will be a blessing in that situation. And then what happened? Your expectations are dashed to the ground. It's a loss. And so you would react emotionally. But what we want to remind you is that, hey, since I hope you are in the ministry model, that's only a hope. I hope you are in the ministry model, because if you're in the ministry model, you would accept it as the will of God. If you are in the ministry, but operating from a business model, you could see all kinds of human emotions, even jealousy, even hatred. It could get to that.
So it seems to me as though the sensible thing to do, and I like the word you use, expectation, the sensible thing to do, be in the ministry model and not to go to the session with any expectations, because it's up to God. And if it's up to God, then he's in control. And so rather than getting disappointed, rather than thinking that you're entitled to something, that I'm entitled to something, I go, you know, and if you are a director or an administrator, you have served your term. I try to tell myself, you know, you're there for 4 years, you have served your term. The term comes to an end. And so the constituency has the opportunity to determine what they're going to do. And if you go with no expectations, then you will not be disappointed. But now our time is halfway gone. So I want to deal with another aspect that I think is rather very important, because as I said earlier, sessions are not just about people being appointed to positions of leadership. It's about change. There is change in the office. There are directors. I mean, there are secretaries, administrative assistants in the office who may be concerned, you know, will I lose the individual that I have worked with for the last 4 years? and we have such a wonderful working relationship, and suppose somebody comes who is not of this particular type, or who knows, somebody may be in the office praying, Lord, please don't let them send back that person here again. So there are all kinds of dynamics
Emotions,
that are there that can be very interesting. So the question here is, what tips can you share with office employees now who may be concerned about change?
Okay, and again, Pastor, that's the great thing about human nature. As you work along closely with people, you become good friends. You become acquaintances first and then friends afterwards, and you share a lot of the pain. Sometimes you have to work on their behalf. Sometimes some they have situations that they can't handle. You will help them handle it, and so it brings a kind of a close knitting of the soul. And so when you have a session or an expected session, then what happens for the staff in the office is that they feel, oh my gosh, well, there's a good chance I may lose my boss if he's a secretary. We work so well together, and I got to know him within this 4 years time, or I got to know her. I know how she thinks. I could almost finish her statements for them. If they call me and say, I need this letter, I could put it together because I basically know them. And then, Lord, you know what? That was making my job so easy. We work like glove in hand. And now I don't know what can happen. This person coming, they may have a different personality. They may have they may have a different way of doing things. And this could create even more stress for me. I don't know if it's going to work out that way. And so that in itself could create a lot of stress in the office. Again, Pastor, it may seem like a revolving door. And that is why I set up those three models at the beginning. In the business model, it's easy. It's easy. I can say, you know what, man? I got a new director. I got a new manager. I don't like this guy. I like the way he, you know what, man? I can't work with him. I resign. I go look for another job. In the political model, it's the same thing. But when it comes to the ministry model, and Pastor, you know what, Doc, it's important. You see how crucial it is now, that really nobody immunized. That we really have to look deep at our connection with God and why we do what we do. Why we do what we do. Because if we don't get a sense of why we do, even in the office staff, except we say, you know what, man, you know what, you're just an office staff, you're not an ordained minister, so you know what, you're not really working for the Lord. You on a job, you on a business, you in a business position. If that is the case, I understand it. But if our front desk, our receptionist, our security guards, whoever they are part of our team, part of running a mission for the Lord, part of the upward movement of hope and bringing salvation to people, then I would expect even the office staff to understand that, there is change. And you know what? Change sometimes demands different personality, different individuals, different backgrounds, even different way of talking, And I must. So what I would suggest is that when you have such a changeover in personnel, I would suggest that the conference or the field, whoever it is, brings in someone who can help kind of mediate and kind of look at some of the issues and talk about it. So at the very start.
Okay, very well. Now let's touch another area, and I'm grateful for your response. Very wise counsel indeed. There's another area that I think is so very important, and I would really like to get your perspective on this. As I said before, we have multiple islands. A pastoral transfer sometimes means that you have to relocate. If I'm transferred from one district to another in a particular territory, it may just mean I go to another church. I don't have to pack up. I don't have to move house. But if I'm transferred to another island, then it's a different system. I have to pack. I have to move, to relocate, new schools for my children, new job for my spouse, and all of these can be impacting on the pastoral family. Now that is why we use the term calling, because you are in mission service, and there is the expectation that you should be available to go where you are sent. So if we can just for a moment talk about the impact on the children. We don't want to deny the reality, but how do we measure? Sorry, I want to talk about creating balance here. How do we establish a balance between recognizing that a relocation can be impacting on my children, but at the same time, I'm open to God's call to go wherever He leads. I remember one year, for example, my son, he started in September in school on one island, and the January we were relocated. He had to change schools, get adjusted in the middle of the school year, that kind of thing. So there is this matter of, I am open to God's call. I'm willing to go where I'm sent, but at the same time, I have a family and I am aware that children can be impacted. How do I balance all of that?
Yeah. And that's such a, this has really derailed a lot of pastors' family. A matter of fact, things that we know as what's called the PK syndrome, the pastor's kids syndrome, because it's not an easy life. It's not an easy life where the child, because especially in your son's case, grade 6, it's a time when they are forming their own identity, when they have formed their friends, their co-friends. Grade 6 is moving into high school, and you are reasserting yourself, and then you just gotta pick up and go. You have to go now and transition and make new friends again. Make new friends. It's very, very tough on children. There is no clear-cut answer to this, but in this case, what would have to happen? The parents, which is the pastor and his wife, would have to do a lot of work, a lot of tender work. And that's why I use the word, the adjective tender, a lot of tender work with their children. Let them understand. You see, again, Doc, a pastor's family, we want to pretend that a pastor's family is just like any other family. A pastor's family is a call of the family. Is a call of the family. And so we should be helping our children understand what it is to be a pastor's son. What happened before, what wrecked a lot of pastors' children is that they were held at this higher standard. Higher standard. Pastors felt like, oh, my son let me down. And they feel discouraged and they feel in that kind of way. I'm not talking about that behavior. I'm talking about the growth. The growth. They must understand, we must help our children to understand what our calling is, and how it impacts the family. Not only, by the way, it's not only the child. What about the wife who may have a job and have to give it up to go, right? It's going to derail, it could derail the plans, not only the emotional setting of children, but it could derail the plans for the complete family. And so I would hope, I don't know what the process is because I'm not a minister of the gospel, or I'm not the minister of the gospel, but I don't know what is the method of transfer. Is it just, you know what, it's like a lottery, okay, you go there, or is there consideration given? If there's consideration given, then I would imagine in that process of transferring that the administration will listen to what maybe some of the concerns, the strong concerns.
I can tell you that we consider all things, and I'm speaking as an administrator now. We consider all things. We do consider individual family circumstances. We consider the needs of the district. Now, the church is of course in the business of preaching the gospel. We are in ministry. We consider the needs of the district. We consider the skills, the strengths of the pastor. We consider where the children are with respect to school. We consider the employment circumstances. But even with a consideration to all of that, there are times when you still have to make a decision that this pastor has to go to that particular place, because at the end of the day, ministry has to take place. One very important thing, because you kind of hinted at it there, and so I'll just bring it up now. I was going to talk about it a little later. But, when pastors are getting married, we have male pastors, we have female pastors. When pastors are getting married, we like to have a conversation with the wife or the husband to be, to suggest that this is what is involved. Now, you mentioned that parents should give that kind of orientation to the children, but the spouse also needs that kind of orientation, that, these are the possibilities. This is what you are going to be getting into. And are you prepared for it? Are you not prepared for it? Sometimes people say, I'm prepared for it, but when the reality strikes, it's another story. And so the concept of the call is an important one. Now, it is also, because as it impacts the pastoral family, it also impacts administration, because sometimes administration has to make recommendations that they know this is going to be a little difficult for this family. But at the end of the day, as I said, speaking as an administrator, ministry takes precedence. We consider all things, but at the end of the day, somebody has to pass in a particular area. And you don't want to tell your parishioners that, listen, you can't get a pastor because none of the pastors are willing to come. Which church member would want to hear that? So, really? That's what they sign up for. So these are some of the challenges there.
Yeah, and you made that point. I was going to make that point earlier, but I said probably I don't want to touch it. But you kind of alluded to it. That's what is important when our pastors are being trained and they are making their life choice of a partner, that all these things are being discussed. We live in a more male-dominated field, by the way, although we have a lot of female pastors too, but that should be taken into consideration, how it's going to affect. I know one good friend of mine, one very good friend of mine, top female pastor in I think she's in California. And what did she do? She got married to another pastor, right? She got married to another pastor. I have another friend in Toronto from the Ontario Conference, and they got married. They both went into ministry, right? What happened in my case, where I'm not ordained, but again, I'm into ministry. My wife is a teacher. Is an Ontario licensed teacher. And when she saw that there was where we were going with this ministry, and she saw how she could be part of that ministry as a parenting coach, as a parenting specialist. And so that I brought her on board and we worked together. No, the good news about us is that our children are all adults with their own children. So we don't have that bridge to cross. But it's important that that pastors speak. We live in a world now where women are doing so much more when it comes to their education. They're taking the education to the top level. And we don't want a lady who went to USC with a pastor. He did his bachelor's degree. He did his MDiv. She did a master's degree, probably in business. I don't know what it is. And he even went to a DMin level. She took it up to a PhD level. And now you're telling me I got to follow you when I got a job, a secured job in St. John's, Antigua, and you're telling me I got to go to Montserrat, So you're going to have a lot of issues because of that. What I would suggest is that, Pastor, you may have to look, and I'm suggesting that to Dr. Tobias too, by the way, that the Caribbean will have to start looking at hiring on their staff people who are trained and equipped to help pastors to mitigate that kind of situation.
It is interesting that, this is what we're talking about now. Some of us can identify with some of the challenges. I'm from one country, my wife is from another country, our children are born in another country, so they and then they started school in one place, they transferred to another place, and that's the nature of the pastoral ministry. But at the end of the day, they turn out to be very good children. At the end of the day, they are, to the best of my knowledge, they are okay. And my wife, for example, didn't work early in my ministry because, we were outside of our home territory and that kind of thing. But God provided. What I'm suggesting is that ministry is not just an ordinary profession. So individuals who are going into ministry, whether you're the pastor or you're the pastor's spouse, it is important to consider what are the implications of the call. There are some persons who go to missionary lands, and it is always a matter of going. I call you and I send you. And there are sacrifices that we have to make sometimes, but God provides at the end of the day. And if we don't have this gruntlement, I like to say that Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, from verse 24, addressed a particular issue, and the bottom line is that he will take care of our needs. Now this may not be, everybody may say this is not for me, but we're talking here about the call to ministry. We're talking about the ministry model that you so beautifully highlighted earlier on. And if you are in the ministry model, you have to appreciate the fact that you are positioning yourself in an environment where you are going to have to be floating, moving from one territory to another, one place to another, because that's the nature of ministry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
and I want to before we wrap this up, I want to go back on a word I used a little early on, because I fell victim to that myself. I had 3 boys, and I was head gung-ho in getting this ministry up and running. I started with a big anti-drug march on the streets of Toronto, 15,000 people, and we end up in the school system, we end up in the jails and everything. And so as a result of my target focused brain, where I wanted to go, my ambitions, sometimes I was insensitive to my boys. Because I expected them to behave a certain way, because I'm known all over North America, and I don't want you to be letting me down, man. So sometimes I would be hard on them, and I would be, oh man, and it did some damage. And I'm just suggesting to a pastor here, that's why I use the word tender early on. Tender. When we have Doc, I'm doing some studies now on ACEs, ACES, and that's adverse childhood experiences and the impact on criminality. Something I probably want to share with your conference one day. And when you see what some of these ACEs are and how they affect young people, many times, man, because we believe our reputation is hinged on our children. When our children, they can't even get a chance to be regular children. We hold them by the collars because it must represent our ministry. And so if there is a pastor listener out there and he's going through that situation where already he has to move to a new territory, and that's an ACE in itself, an adverse childhood experience, then dad, notice I didn't call the pastor now, call your dad. Dad, you need to put a loving, tender touch on that boy, on that girl. Let them know, let them understand that we are in this. Help them to understand its ministry. Help them to understand who we serve in, right? And that they're part of the mix. They're part of the family too. And when you succeed, the family succeeds, right? And so be tender with them, because that in itself, that moving around and that transfer is already, it may not be an ace for you, or it might not be traumatic for you, pastor, but for your children, your family. So be tender as possible and sell them on the importance of doing God's work.
I mean, the matter of pastoral children and how ministry impacts them can be an entire program that we can talk about one of these days. But we only have 6 minutes. So I want to touch one final aspect before we wrap it up. And that has to do now, not with the pastoral family, not with the pastor himself or herself, not with the conference employees, but church members, because church members are also concerned about, am I going to lose my pastor? I love my pastor so much. And, you know, there's a possibility that my pastor may be transferred. And as you mentioned, loss leads to grief.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. But you may have in one congregation 2 different sides of the same coin. You may have some church members who, like, you know, they're individuals who call and say, Pastor, after session, if you're back as president, please consider a different pastor. And from the same congregation, Pastor, I want you to know that I really love my pastor. Please don't let him leave. You know, so it's interesting, the perspective who you speak to can make a big difference. But what do you say to church members as they relate to all of this readjustment?
And that would have to be, Pastor, that would have to be in the hands of the elders, the church administration, the local church administration, right? You know, in Grenada, I wrote an article because after the election in June 23, when the Keith Mitchell regime was voted out and the Deacon Mitchell, young guy was voted in. That was the Thursday. The Sabbath and the Sunday of that weekend it was dubbed Thanksgiving. Okay, so you have the Adventist churches now, and you probably know Pastor Enoch Isaac. You probably know him, right?
Yes.
And I work with Enoch.
And I read your article, by the way. Yes.
Yes.
It was thought-provoking.
And I said to them, look, in the very same congregation, the 2 colors are green and yellow, political colors. And while you say Thanksgiving that we have won, you have some people grieving that they've lost in the same congregation. So you have to be very careful as a pastor how you enter there, because if you say with Thanksgiving, others might, and it's the same situation here, dynamics, when it comes to the pastor, because here it is, a pastor is leaving. For some people, they say, thank God he's gone, right? While another person who is deeply attached to him say, oh no, and grief actually occurs there. So I think what happened here is that, again, I could just use my own experience, because Pastor, wherever I go to work, people become very, very become very close to me, because I'm dealing with all the psychosocial dysfunctions. And as I speak, people, I kind of itch where it scratches, and people become very close to me. I said to them, you know what? I want you to listen to what I'm saying. Listen to the message, the concept and strategy I'm giving you, and don't get hooked on the guy, because not only is he transferred, but he could die in an accident. He could die in an accident, right? So I think as good leaders that are called, we have to help people to understand we want them, because it's great to have human affection. But at the same time, we got to be so careful. Let them realize that this is not necessarily about me, but I came here to do our work. I'm glad you appreciate it, but there'll be a time for leaving, right? So I think it left.
But it's interesting, because, you know, if a pastor, any pastor for that matter, good or bad, if a pastor gets in an accident and dies, one of the things administration would do is to provide grief counseling for the congregation. Right? No, I mean, I'm saying that's interesting. I'm an administrator, but you raise an issue that, you know, I have not thought about before. I can say that. I'm human, of course. We would provide grief counseling for that congregation. But if a pastor is transferred, we don't provide grief counseling for the congregation. And it's kind of struck me there that some people may really be in a process of real grief because they have lost that particular pastor. You know, that's rather very interesting. Just an observation.
Yeah. So I'm suggesting. A matter of fact, You know what? I'm in the process of pitching Dr. Tobias, and I know he listens to your program, with a regional response unit, right? A regional response unit. So that wherever there is trauma, there is within our churches or within a national setting, we as Seventh Adventists could respond. And in the making, in doing that, I'm also trying to recommend a micro organization like this locally, so that when we have issues like that, transfers or death or whatever the loss is, someone could go in, some interventionist could go in there and help the church work along with the issues.
Well, Dr. Tobias is one of the most regular listeners to this program. He is not listening this afternoon. I think he's going to listen to it a little later because he has another engagement, I may say. But he will definitely hear it because he is, whenever he misses one, he goes back and he listens to it. But Doc, our time is up. This hour on Sabbath afternoon fly by very quickly. There was a very interesting question I just spotted in the chat there that I wish we had time to respond to, about whether, in fact, we don't have time to respond to it, but it was a question dealing with whether or not the pastor should allow the children, should the pastor set standards for the children, or should the children be left to choose their own friends? Now that question is loaded, and I'm sorry we don't have time to respond to it. But our time is up and we have to go. I want to thank you, Dr. Chaitan, for sharing with us again on Let's Talk. You started the program and you are here today on our 3rd anniversary. Really do appreciate it. You have shared some very amazing insights. I know that you are heavily into crime reduction, and one of these days, maybe hopefully very soon, we will talk about crime in the Caribbean and its impact on our churches and how the church should be responding to that, because that is an area. We have some situations in some of our public schools here in Antigua that need to be addressed, and the church, of course, should always make a difference. But we will discuss that for another Let's Talk program at another time. Thank you so much. May God bless you.
God bless you. It was fun. It was fun.
Yes.
God bless.
Yes.
Okay.
All the best. Bye-bye, folks.
Bye.